Hi, welcome to KiwaniTalk. My name is Gary Gardner. On the show, which is a public information program put together by people from the Dearborn Kiwanis Club with help from faculty and staff at Dearborn High. Here we are at WDHS, my alma mater, my guest's alma mater.
That's right.
Anybody who's important's alma mater. Well, and we're here to talk about one of the persons who was a legend in many, many ways. Legend in Dearborn schools for the film program, legend on radio, Paul McCartney's nemesis because he thought he was dead. But to talk about Russ Gibb and the film program and the video program, Andy Fradkin. Andy, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I was here, we were talking before the show, back right after the Earth's crust finished cooling. I was back in 1971 when I graduated. You came along a little bit later. When did you come through the Dearborn schools, and where were you part of the video program here at Dearborn High?
So I graduated from the wonderful Dearborn High back in '94.
Okay.
And my first taste of the video program was actually in '88.
Okay.
Through the wonderful Lindbergh Elementary School, where I went. My art teacher at the time got me into taking my cartoons and comics that I was drawing and kind of pushed me into how do I make animation.
Okay.
So I started doing stop motion animation and claymation using Super 8 film, as we were talking about earlier.
Right, a whole different world for those who have no idea what we're talking about.
And you prayed that it came out okay.
Right.
After spending all the money to develop it.
Yeah.
And her daughter was actually in the program here through Russ. And I did a kind of like a mini summer camp with her as my tutor.
Okay.
She introduced me to the studio, introduced me to video, introduced me to Russ. He yelled at me the first time I met him. You know, as this little sixth grader, so I shed a few tears at that point. But
you got used to it?
I got used to it.
You did it a lot.
Indeed. So that was really the start,
Okay.
and really the intro to Russ. So.
Well, the film program here actually started back when I was here, back in 69, 70, 71. Richard Corvu we actually had a show with Richard Corvu, Russ Gibb, and Kurt Doley, Kurt was here for many years. But that film program really, really grew and developed under Russ Gibb.
Oh, yeah.
But before Russ was a film teacher, he also had a career in radio and broadcasting. What can you tell us about that?
I was going to say, he's had many different chapters of his life.
Right.
And it's funny because they're all so different. And this is coming from a Detroit kid who grew up in Detroit, and didn't have a whole lot thought of, what am I going to be later in life? And so one of the things that he got into was rock and roll and just discovering what the scene was like. One of the things that he did was that he's probably best known for was the Grandy Ballroom in Detroit. Really, a lot of big name acts really got their start there. And he went out to San Francisco with a friend and saw this crazy place called the Fillmore out there where they had light shows and these things called strobe lights and all kinds of craziness going on. And said, how do I bring that back to Detroit where nothing like this exists? And that's how he started the Grandy Ballroom. And with that, it went from this, couple of kids showing up one Saturday night to hear this band play. And the next day it was a few more, and then he started to panic because he's going to go broke on this venture of all this money into this building and this $300 strobe light that he bought and brought back. And pretty soon it just caught on and grew, and people talked, and it was this place for the music and the people that wanted the music. And the acts just kept coming through, and it became a cultivation ground for really a whole music generation and really music revolution in Detroit.
MC5 came through there, I guess?
MC5 was the house band,
Yep.
So Rob Tyner and
Kicking out the jams.
Kicking out the jams. I'll not.
Yeah, you can finish it off.
I'll not finish that off. But some of the big acts like The Who, Janis Joplin, Grateful Dead, Eric Clapton, Cream, list goes on and on. And some of the British bands actually just talked about coming to Detroit. And really the key step was to get a gig at the Grandy, because in some of the places in England, they would get a nice polite, that's a nice show. And then at the Grandy, people would be screaming and, ripping their hair off or whatever going
else
nuts.
off,
Yeah.
yeah. So
At these acts, and the bands thought that was tremendous.
an appreciation of their art
Correct.
and their artistry.
Correct.
So that's a long way, was part of a sort of radio part too. He was
Yeah.
hate to use the word disc jockey, but he was a disc jockey too.
Absolutely.
He was on Keener.
He went through Keener and a couple different
WKNR 13.
That's right.
So
couple different stations there, and one of his famous attributions was on one of his shows. He had a call-in guest who said, "Hey, man, have you ever played Revolution Number 9 backwards?"
for those of you who don't know, that's one of the Beatles songs. It was,
There you go.
yeah, there's some people out there that are saying, what is he talking about? But go
Right.
ahead, yeah. Play it
And
backwards.
Good clarification.
Yeah.
And if you play it backwards, it says Paul McCartney's dead.
Paul is dead.
Paul is dead.
Paul is
and
dead.
When you played it back, it actually said, "Turn me on, dead man."
Okay.
And so Russ got that going on the show and really got that out there, and then all kinds of activity blossomed from there.
National.
National, international. And that led to a lot more clues, depending on if you believe the myth or not, coming out in other songs or in album covers like Abbey Road from
Where
the
he was
Beatles.
walking barefoot, and that
He's
was
walking
meant that you were
barefoot.
dead and you take your shoes off. Yep.
Exactly. Plenty of other, there's a rockumentary that came out that really strung together all these clues and all these songs and the little clips where you'd play them backwards and the different messages. And it's an interesting story that they claim Paul is dead and Billy Shears was his replacement. So in Sgt.
After all these
Pepper's,
years.
in Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club band,
right.
the end, they talk about Billy Shears.
Right.
And so, obviously, a huge thing that Russ would always get interviewed about, questions, and something that always came up associated to Russ. And probably in the early 90s, Paul McCartney was here in town for a tour, and his agent reached out to Russ
Okay.
and said, "Hey, Paul wants to meet you,"
Okay.
and say, "Hey, I'm here."
And did Russ say, "Hi, Billy"? When he
And-
shook his hand?
Well, Russ put together a stipulation. He said, "That'd be great, I'd love to meet him, but I want a signed headshot of him that says, 'Dear Russ, I'm still alive, you,'
Right.
expletive,
Yeah.
Paul McCartney."
Okay.
And Paul wouldn't do it. So
didn't-
Russ said, "Oh well,
never met him.
nope."
Well, good for Russ. So that's a whole different kind of world.
Yeah.
Rock and roll and all the attendant things that happened with rock in the 60s
Right,
to being a teacher.
absolutely.
How did that transition happen? How did Russ get from Randy Ballroom, Keener rock and roll to Dearborn Schools as a teacher?
So it was an interesting journey, obviously, and as some of the acts were flying from coast to coast and not necessarily taking the bus in between and stopping in Detroit, as some of the costs and the greed, started building in rock and roll, it became a much riskier proposition to put on these shows. And in the end, some of the shows, Russ was clearing not that much money, considering how much he was putting out and the risk he took. So he eventually said, this isn't going anywhere. So he made that switch over into teaching, out of all things, because he was interested in education, always had been. He had been a part of, worked in Washington, D.C., and the education, I forget the name, not bureau, but
Department of Education.
Department of Education, thank you. And he actually went around the country visiting different schools and visiting different school systems and really acting as power from the White House. So that kind of took him into the whole different path of teaching and settling back here in Dearborn, where he was living, and originally teaching classes like English and so forth, but then kind of breaking into this new media. One of Russ's things was always he was always ahead of the time. So whether it was what he was doing at the Grandy, what he was doing, in terms of technology, things like that, he was always a couple steps ahead. So this thing called cable television was out there, and that was one of his look-aheads to say, this could make some money. And he ended up buying into the franchises and helping to negotiate some of those, including the ones that came here eventually to Dearborn, along with Michael Berry. And the two of them cut some deals for the city and with the city and established cable here in the area, as well as a contribution from, at that point, Teleprompter was the cable provider, of putting back money into the community.
And one of the reasons that we are here today as a show, KiwaniTalk, the longest running cable access TV show in the world. We've been doing this for 28 years now, which is a long
It's a
time.
beautiful record.
And we claim that record because no one's going to contest us.
There you go. You got a lawyer here too.
We've also been doing continuously for all that time too.
Yeah.
And part of the cable commission requirements, or the franchise requirements, were to provide cable access for shows just like this and other shows that came along. Talk about that.
Exactly. So that was part of what Russ and Michael and a few others had negotiated in. And at that point in time, it was around public access and the channels that would be offered, as well as access at that point to the studio. And so, nowadays, obviously the cameras are everywhere in everybody's pocket, and there's 300 before you walk out the door. Cameras everywhere. But at that point in time, cameras were expensive, big, heavy, required all kinds of knowledge to be able to set up and get going. So these studios were not very common. So to provide access to people to actually make programming on, whether it was a cooking show or whether it was you talking about your favorite set of sneakers, that was the opening that they had. And then it was, how does the community actually get funding to help make their dreams come alive and educate others and provide for the community back whatever that production is.
And that's part of what they would have classes for people, learn how to use the equipment.
Absolutely.
Don't point them at the lights,
Right.
don't
Tubes.
drop the equipment,
Yeah.
all type of things.
Absolutely.
So that was he was always into education then.
Always. And establishing the program here in the early 80s, or what became the video production, it was really this room, actually, and which was a speech room.
Right.
So, and it was getting donations of equipment, getting funding. Russ could go squeeze and convince Eskimos to buy ice. And likewise, he could get donations from Sony and others to actually build what was the studio at the time.
And what has developed in this facility, if you understand anything about facilities, is really state of the art.
It
If
always
you look
was.
at the set, look at all the massive set we have behind us.
Absolutely.
Through the magic of digital TV, the quality of the cameras, the equipment, everything else.
Absolutely.
LED lights, that whole thing. Well, we're going to continue our discussion about Russ Gibb, the man, the myth, the legend,
There you go.
with Andy Fradkin. We've got a few words about Kiwanis. Don't go away. We're going to continue more about the history and some of the behind the scenes and the Paul the Zed stuff. Is past us, move on to the new stuff.
There you go.
Don't go away.
Who is a kid? Well, that's a kid. And another. Look, a gaggle of them. Or is it a herd? Litter? Pride. But what about her? Tell her she's not a kid. Or him. So how do we tell who is a kid? Height? Age, maybe. But some of us have to grow up faster than others. A kid. A kid. A kid wants to make the world better. And one day, he just might. Is a kid fearless? Vulnerable? Strong? Nervous? Yes. 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 Kiwanis is 600,000 kids at heart doing all the little and big things it takes to help children around the world. Because kids need Kiwanis. All of them.
Welcome back to KiwaniTalk. I'm your host, Gary Gardner. We're talking about Russ Gibb, again, a man who has a legendary effect, not on some people, but on many, many, many people, especially the students that he taught and the people he educated and helped train, and his foresight into some of the media things that is just unbelievable. We're talking with Andy Fradkin about that. Andy started working with Russ when you were in 6th grade.
That's right.
And you never looked back.
No.
So you came to work with Russ when you were in 6th grade.
Right.
And he had a habit of barking at people,
Oh, yes.
but in a well-meaning way, but in a sometimes a little cruel way. Talk about that.
I was going to say he was, you know,
Curmudgeon?
we were all accustomed to it at some point, but if you didn't know what it was very foreign.
Mm-hmm.
Because he would, his belief was, if I'm not yelling at you, it means I have no idea who you are or I have no interest in you. If I'm yelling at you, it means I love you.
Okay.
So,
Tough love.
tough love,
Yeah.
exactly. So he called it Reality 101, is what the class was. He said, you're going to learn about video, you're going to learn about the technology, but mainly his role was a facilitator. So it was to make everything work. His hero was always Toto from The Wizard of Oz, because Toto pulled the curtain back on the wizard to show really what was going on behind the scenes. And that's what Russ liked to do. He liked to show really what was going on behind the scenes. And then the students would actually lead and run the program. So there were station managers, there were directors, there were all kinds of roles, engineers within the program. And one of Russ's strong points was really finding a good fit for everybody. He found the good in everybody. The kids that were maybe problems in other classes or didn't really fit in with this or that or the other, they were a good fit here.
And it's unusual because, not unusual, but it's different because you go to a math class, you have an hour in math class, maybe half-hour homework,
Right.
and that's it. There's a difference with video and film and this kind of stuff. Talk about that exponential investment of time that he would invest in the students, or they would willingly invest in themselves.
It was a whole different animal because, to your point, you never went home and said, I'm a math guy through and through. It was something you did.
Right.
It's something you learned. It's important, but it's not an emotional attachment. And you do what you had to do to get it done. With the video program, it became not just something you did here in class, but it became something you did after hours. It became something you did on the weekends. You might go on a shoot. You might go even concerts or making your own videos. What you would do wouldn't necessarily all take place here in the classroom. The editing that would take place, there would be hours that kids would stay behind and do that after school. So sports, things like that, some people, that was a great fit. People love sports. And there were a number of people that, were not sports people, more creative potentially. And this was someplace that they fit and they belonged.
And he encouraged that, like you said. He didn't
Absolutely.
make you do it.
No.
He made you want to do it.
Correct.
Somehow.
Correct.
How does that happen?
It was this whole camaraderie that he built and this whole family that he built. He really didn't have a family, per se, but all of us students became his family. And he grew that family over the years, and everyone kept in touch. There's so many that have just, come back around and have always been in touch with Russ over the years, whereas a lot of other teachers, they're wonderful people, but that connection after school or after graduation just isn't there quite like it was with this program.
And you started with Russ in 6th grade, went through high school after that. You started
Right.
here and whatever. But you worked with him on the Back Porch Video and Russ Gibb at Random. Talk about those programs.
So Back Porch Video was another offset of or outshoot of the public access. So it was a Saturday night live TV program for 3 hours, run by the students. Students as talent, students doing everything. On a Saturday night from 9 to midnight.
Over at the over by Greenfield and Rotunda somewhere. That's where it was.
The old cable
Right.
studio there,
Yep.
which was Cablevision or Group W or
All the iterations.
100 different companies, right? So when I think about it now, and basically Russ wasn't there. He would just watch the show from home. There was a set of chaperones there, but it was up to the students to do everything else. Produce, direct, come up with the video playlist, because we would play music videos, everything for those 3 hours. And it was a great lesson in life, because if someone didn't do something, it didn't happen, or everyone else had to pick it up. It was a lot about leadership, and then of course the production aspects, because Russ was always watching. And if that special blue phone on the wall rang that only he had the number for, it was a call from Russ.
Okay.
Tilt down, or that microphone's too bright, or get that girl, out of the background, she's distracting,
Right.
whatever it was. And it was kind of that voice from God coming in on the phone. But it was a very autonomous entity.
So how many students would be there on a Saturday night, every Saturday night,
Every Saturday night.
all year round?
Yep.
And again, this is not a school, you don't get credit for school.
No.
You just something that you would do, and there's like untold hours of preparation for that,
Correct.
plus the stuff on camera.
Setup would start at 6 o'clock on Saturdays, and people would be there through almost 1 a.m. tearing down.
You should know they're off the streets. That's a good thing.
You know where they are.
You know where they are, and you can see them.
And there was probably, some people would come in and out during the night, but there's good 20, 30 plus students down there.
And then Russ had the Russ Gibb at Random show. What was that about?
So that was a talk show where he would have guests on, and then on Sunday nights he would do a 2-hour live segment with call-in people, and people call in whatever was on their mind. And that was his kind of world of fake news before fake news, and social media before social media. He would bring up topics, or sometimes we would inject topics that he would want to talk about. If it was a quiet night and no one was calling in, we'd have the security guard call in and say, "Hi, this is, John calling from West Dearborn. Russ, what do you think about the mayor and, whatever?" And it would just be to stir up controversy, and then the phones would light up, and it was just a whole dance that Russ did. It was he would talk about the power of the media. And the most powerful weapon in the world is the camera, because you can show what you want to show, you can take out what you don't want to show. And then when you actually have people see it, they might not see what happened before or after that led to that event, but you can show them what you want to show them and get them to react.
Now, Russ was very active in the community in many, many ways. He left a pretty good legacy.
Absolutely.
Talk about that.
So he was, despite his hard shell and his barking at students and his reality 101, he had a really soft heart, and he wanted to help people out constantly. one of his, again, education was a huge tenet in his life. And he donated countless dollars to students, to scholarships, to programs. He plowed a lot of his own money into this program. And he was always finding a way to give. And very often you wouldn't hear about it. It would be quiet. And all the other media and all the other attention he'd love to stir up and get for the program or for the students, it wouldn't be about him. It would be about the program or the students.
Now, he passed recently,
Yep.
and there was at the wake and the whatever ceremony or celebration, there was talk about how many people showed up for that and what the memories they shared.
Yeah, so we ended up organizing a memorial service, and just to take it Russ style, he of course had his very direct words about certain things, but what we ended up doing was we did a gathering, so to speak, over at the Ford Community and Performing Arts Center here in Dearborn.
Very appropriate, yeah.
And took over Studio A, which, if you've been there, it's a lovely facility and parquet floors and big open space. And just to make it very personalized to Russ, we had countless memorabilia from throughout the ages in the back, but then we had peanut M&Ms and Diet Coke, because those were his staple at one point. And probably 200 to 300 people showed up.
Wow.
It turned into a fun celebration of life. And there was even one of the famous artists, Dennis Lauren, who did a lot of the concert posters in the 60s. He, the week of, actually designed a concert poster. And instead of the venue or the rock and roll show, it was the memorial service, with the details of the memorial service, the tribute to his life, the different corners of his life, the music, the DJ, the teacher, the rock and roll. And it was a very fitting tribute to Russ.
We're down to our last minute, Andy. Tell us what Russ Gibb meant to you in your life and what he taught you.
I was going to say he shaped a lot of us and shaped me as well. It taught me a lot about life. So I may not work in video production, I may not have gone into that, but the things he taught about leadership, about how you get what you want, about how you treat other people, and what you give back were just important lessons that still stick with me today.
Well, I want to thank you very much for coming in and sharing some of the backstage
Yes, there
part
you go.
of Russ Gibb's life.
Yeah.
The things that people need to know about, need to hear about.
Yeah.
He was a tremendous influence on many, many people, more than you can imagine.
Absolutely.
So thank you for coming in, Andy Fradkin. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for watching KiwaniTalk. Look up Russ Gibb. We've had some videos showing here about what's going on. Kenny did a great job putting it together. Thank you. Come back to KiwaniTalk next time. Bye-bye.